photograph with a color cast is fairly common, and there's a number of different reasons why there could be a color cast. In this particular image, I had the white balance incorrectly set on the camera, and as a result, I have an image here that's too warm. There's too much red in the image. So to remove a color cast, there's a number of different methods we can use. A quick way of removing a color cast would be to first create an adjustment layer. We'll create a levels adjustment layer. And you'll notice here on the left hand side there's three eyedropper tools. One sets the white point, one sets the gray point, and then the last one sets the black point. And these eyedroppers allow you to designate what is pure white, pure gray, and pure black in an image. So you can see here we don't have a true gray or true black in the image, but we do have a white. So we'll go ahead and click on the white point eyedropper, and we'll select an area of the image that we know is white. Click. You can see here it removes some of the color cast, but doesn't really do that great of a job on this particular image. There's a bit too much red that's still left in the image. So another automated way of doing this would be to use auto color. We can do that by coming up here to Image, Auto Color, and you can see that kind of does the same thing. Doesn't do that great of a job either of removing the color cast in this particular image. So a better method would be to use a by the numbers method, also known as the 90% method. This method was taught to me by Eddie Tapp, who is a Photoshop guru and one of the original Photoshop evangelists. So to use the 90% method, we're first going to create a levels adjustment layer. And then we want to bring up the info panel, and we can do this by either going through the menu or hitting F8. And then we'll select the eyedropper tool. Now what I want to do is find something that is pure white and pure black in the image. Now for this image, I have the advantage of having a Macbeth color chart. This is also called a chip chart. And one of the key advantages of using a chip chart is that we have a reference point. And these swatches on the bottom of the chip chart, they're all grayscale, which means that they're all neutral. They don't have any color. So to illustrate how this method works, I'm first going to create a layer, and then I'm going to fill that layer with a yellow to simulate a color cast. Now I'm going to go over here and select the eyedropper tool. With the eyedropper tool selected, when I hold down Shift, it becomes the color sampler tool. And when I click, it creates a color sample point, and it also opens up the info panel. And this shows me the RGB values for the sample point I just created. And I can tell from the RGB values here, you can see that red is the highest value. I can see that in this particular sample, there's more red than green or blue. The highest value, 235, is in the red channel. So if we create a levels adjustment layer and shift the green and the blue values to 235, what do you think is going to happen? Well, let's give it a try. We'll come over here to our levels property panel. We'll navigate to the green channel, and then we'll pull the highlight slider to the left until we reach a value that's 235 or close to it. Okay, so now let's do it with the blue. Go ahead and move the blue highlight slider over until we reach 235. And you can see now all of the values are exactly the same, and what do we have? Pure white. So this is how the method works. Essentially, we're finding something that we believe to be white in the image, creating a sample point, choosing a dominant channel, and then getting the other two channels to match numerically with that dominant channel. Okay, so before we move on, let's get rid of our existing sample point by holding down Shift Option, and then we can click and it will delete. So let's employ the same method for this image, but this time instead of just choosing a white, we're also going to choose a black. Now when you're looking for a white point to sample, you want to make certain that none of your RGB values are over 254. And when you're looking for a black point, you want to make certain that none of the values are less than 1. So for example, this is white, but if we look here to the right, the red value is 255. We don't want to use that. This sample also, we still have a value that's higher than 254, so then we'll go to this one. And this looks like it'll work. The highest value is 226, so we'll go ahead and hold down Shift and click to create a target. And then we'll come over here to our black, and we can see the values are higher than 1, which is good. And you can see we don't have any values that are less than 1, so hold down Shift and click to set our second point. And then we'll do like we did before. We'll go ahead and create a levels adjustment layer, So we want to first adjust the white point. Now before you do your adjustment, you want to look at your red, green, and blue channels, and you want to use the highest value for your white point and the lowest value for your black point. So you can see 226 is the highest value. That means that we're going to make changes to the green and the blue channel. So we'll come over here and change this to green, slide the highlight over until we reach 226 or close, and there you go. Now we'll do the blue channel. We'll move that to 226. Sometimes you'll find it's not possible to get the exact number, but you can get close. If you can't get the number exactly where it needs to be, you need to get it as close as possible. So 225, that works for the highlights. You can see this has already cleaned up quite a bit of that color cast. So now let's make sure that the blacks are balanced. We'll first find the lowest black value, which is in the green. And just by looking at these numbers, given that they're so close together, I can see just by looking at the numbers that there's very little color cast in the shadow areas of the image. So to balance out the blacks, we'll identify the lowest value, which is green here. And that means that we're going to change the red and the blue channels. So let's come over here to the red channel, and we'll move the shadow slider just a little bit to 63, and then we'll come back here to the blue and slide that one over to 63. Let's go back here one more time to the highlights. Sometimes when we adjust one part of the image, it'll affect another part of the image. So you can see here the blue value is off just a little bit, so we'll come back here to the blue highlight area, and we'll slide this over and make it exact. So look at that. All of our RGB values are the same in the highlight and in the shadow area, and as a result, we don't have a color cast, our blacks are black, and our whites are white. So let's look at another image. You can see in this image we don't have the advantage of having a color chart, but I know that the subject had on a white shirt and black shoes, so I can use those as sample points. We'll do the same thing as we did before. We'll come over here to levels, hold down shift to select our white target, hold down shift again to select our black. If we come up here and look at the numbers, you can see the highest value is in the blue channel, which makes sense because if you look at the image, it does have an overall blue cast. So I want to first identify the highest value here, which is 252, the lowest value in the shadow area, which is 21. I'll come back in here into my levels. I'll move my red over to until I hit 252. I'll move my red over and get as close to 252 as I can. Do 250. I'll move my green 251. Now let's work on the shadow areas. We see the lowest value is blue, so that means we need to move the red and the green over to 25, as close to 25 as we can. And we'll move the green over. Okay. And you can see when I adjusted the shadow areas, it did also affect the highlight areas, so we'll come back in here into our red and green and make minor adjustments to those. And you can see our shadows line up. Our highlight values are pretty close to 252. And now if we compare the before and after, you can see it takes out that blue color cast. So if you have an image like this that has a color cast but doesn't have a neutral value, you're just going to have to do it visually. And what's important to note before you start doing any kind of color work on an image like this, make sure that your monitor is calibrated. So if you're looking at 50% gray, it is a neutral gray, not a blue gray, not a warm gray, but a neutral gray. So for this one, we're just going to use curves to make the correction. I do that by coming down here and creating a curves adjustment layer. Now to illustrate what's happening here, let's go to our color panel and we'll pull this down and select color wheel. Now you'll notice on the color wheel, we have our primary colors. We have red, green, and blue. And then our secondary colors, which are in between. We've got cyan, yellow, and magenta. So if we select the eyedropper tool and we hover over an area that we believe to be somewhat neutral, like this concrete block, you can see to the right, the highest values I have are in the blue channel. If I look at the CMYK, you can see that there's more cyan than magenta or yellow in the image. And if I come back here to my color wheel and I try to find that on the color wheel, you'll see 180 degrees from this point is red. So if we want to get rid of the cyan, we need to add red. So how we can do that is coming over here to the red channel and then selecting this icon here. And what this will allow me to do is make a very targeted change in my curves. So here I want to move the red channel. I want to add red to this image just slightly to get rid of some of the cyan. And look at the difference that makes. Now that's gotten rid of a lot of the color cast, but if I come back here to show RGB, I can see most of the values in this image fall within that mid-tone area. So if I come back here to my red channel, because curves allows me to create anchor points, I can move this anchor point over just slightly and impact more of the mid-tone area. Something like that. Okay? So here's the before and here's the after. Looks a lot better. I can also come back in here and just add a little touch of green in there just to neutralize it a little bit more. I'm using my skin tones as a reference, and you can see the difference that makes. Here's the before and the after.